everyone. So very good discussion earlier. And now for our keynote, our finale, Christian Dawson from I2 Coalition. We heard from him yesterday, but he's graciously agreed to provide the keynote, which he's been reworking based on what he's heard here and events yesterday, and hopefully you find it very provocative discussion. Christian.
Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate it. And thank you for allowing me to close us out on 2 days of interesting conversations. I now get to provide a synopsis of where I feel we're at in the DNS industry today, and at the end I'll turn to you to react to my thoughts and to share some of your own. I've only been in the ICANN-related world for like 3 years, but at this point I can't imagine having a talk like this without an open mic portion. When Paul and Beth reached out to me last month to talk about what I wanted to talk about, I chose digital convergence as my theme. And I find it interesting that it was just this past week that the iPhone 7 was announced. How many of you guys are going to get that? Anybody? A couple? Okay, that's fine. There's an interesting significance of them getting rid of the headphone jack that I don't think has been talked about much. It's the last analog piece of tech in a device that's now at the center of our daily lives. Your phone is now the center of your banking information, your healthcare information, your movies, your music, your correspondence, the ways that you engage with your friends and your business partners. It's a converged device, and now it's completely digital. And the iPhone came out in 2007, 9 years ago, and look how the world's changed. I have a 9-year-old son. He's amazing, he's brilliant. He's changed my life in ways that I can't believe, but he's 9. His future's ahead of him. And his true impact on the world is only going to grow. The same is true with the future of these connected devices. ICANN was created in 1988, only 9 years longer than that. And now we stand poised on a complete privatization of the domain name system, a sign of the maturity of that system, but this is just the beginning. We're 18, and we're just leaving the home. There's still a whole life to live. The commercial internet's only also about twice as old as the iPhone. I joined the industry in 1995, 3 years before the formation of ICANN. And my job at that point was convincing companies that they should explore maybe getting one of these things called a website, right? That time led me to a philosophy that I now bring to engaging in policy discussions around our industry. So as I talk about what the status of the industry is, I'm going to do so by starting with sharing a parable with you. When the winds of change blow, some build shelters, some build windmills. A lot of us here are engaged in policy, and when you think of the policy fights that we've had over the past 2 decades, I'll bet you that you could put almost every one of them in the windmills versus shelters context. Do any of you remember SOPA PIPA? Okay. Well, that was my first major policy fight. And that was the story of a competent, mature industry trying to find ways to protect it from change and to solve the problems that change had brought to their industry. An understandable goal. The content industry was building shelters. The internet industry was busy building windmills. And in that case, our goal was to explain how their shelters and the ways that they wanted to build them threatened our windmills in unacceptable ways. And now I take a look at the internet industry today, and I feel like it's a really interesting time because the pace of change is so fast in this world today that some of us who have always been fighting for innovation, the people who provide the tools for the windmill makers, we now need to be careful that we don't start to get so worried about the pace of change that we don't start spending most of our time building shelters. The world is changing, and outpacing that change is hard. And indeed, even though the last 9 years have showed a big sea change, in the next 9 years, this industry is going to look shockingly different. Change brings opportunity and it brings risk. And how you meet the change determines the role you play in the dichotomy between shelters and windmills. So let's talk a little bit about the changes that we see in this industry right now to see if we can catch a glimpse of where things are going. So I want to talk about the edge providers and the cloud providers who I work with on a daily basis, and they're doing such interesting things these days. There was a time really recently where I put my content in one place online and I knew exactly where it lived. Cloud and edge technology have already made that, so that's really no longer the case. What's in store for tomorrow? It seems like it's changing every day. AWS is innovating constantly. Dyn and Cloudflare and hundreds of others of my friends in the cloud have changed the game many times over in this past decade, and there's no end in sight. Let's talk about the Internet of Things. Cars, watches, shoes, toothbrushes, cars. I mean, forks. This is how we're experiencing the internet these days. But of course, that brings security concerns. How do we keep ourselves safe in a world with no one standard? How do we deal with the fact that sloppy network security puts general internet users at risk on a regular basis? And what kinds of things should we be doing? Will regulating Internet of Things stifle innovation? Will not regulating it cause public risk? IoT is one of the environments most driving privacy concerns. Those policy discussions are ongoing, and where we land on those conversations set the tone for the world for years to come. Don't care about your privacy online because you're not doing anything wrong? Try being gay in Saudi Arabia. It's a sign of awful privilege to not care about privacy online and to not want to be part of that conversation. IoT is already vitally important. There are now more connected devices than there are people. How are we in this industry going to meet those challenges and the opportunities of IoT? If we aren't thinking through these things, we're missing the boat. Let's take a look at what's happening with AI. Until recently, Google referred to themselves as a search company, as an advertising company. Now they've rightfully highlighted that they're a machine learning company. Artificial intelligence is going to change the world in ways that I can't even begin to guess at. But I know that we in this industry need to have our eye on it. What's interesting here is that much of what IoT and AI changes about the world leads to digital communications that use APIs to communicate information more than the naming system. Again, if we don't get ahead of our place in the world, we'll find ourselves behind it. Yet another technology we're just beginning to explore its place in tomorrow's world of, is blockchain. If there was ever a technology we wanted to get ahead of before we're in its rearview mirror, it's that. Disruption cycles completely transform industries. Are we going to continue to be windmill makers, or are we going to start building shelters? No matter what, for right now, at least, we remain at the center of internet infrastructure convergence. Whether we maintain that position will come down to two things: what business decisions we make and what policy decisions we allow to get made. Both of these require us to take an innovative look at the future. In business, we need to meet the challenges of the changing cloud, the changing edge, the role of IoT, AI, blockchain, and other disruptive technologies. And in policy, we need to stay focused on what has made this industry great. We need to continue to be windmill makers and support the windmill makers that use our technologies. We in this now converged industry support the whole economy, not just the disruptors, but the disruptors built us, and they keep us relevant. Disruption is and will always be a field driven by small businesses, startups. This is the world I come from. That's what we built I2 Coalition to speak for, to defend the rights of. Yesterday in our panel on content, we spoke about how to tackle the real problems that the content industry faces online. We've been fighting those battles for years, and I talked about needing to find solutions that scale. I'm not just talking about building solutions that can be done quickly at a large scale. We need solutions that scale down. Because when we stop building systems and methods of solving problems that can be achieved by people building ideas and projects in their basements, in their dorm rooms, or in the middle of a desert, we stop supporting innovation. And if we allow the internet to stop innovating, our role in the internet ecosystem is far from assured. The dustbin of history is filled with groups that stopped building windmills and they started building shelters. Because it often seems like the competent, safe way to go. But change moves too quickly, especially today, and it won't be stopped. As the world changes, we need to continue to solve problems. We talked about the problems of the intellectual property community yesterday, and that's not a conversation that's going away. Security, privacy, government access to data, jurisdiction. Right now, we're in the hot seat for all these talks. And they're real problems that need real solutions. There are also conversations that need to happen in the right venues. Obviously, there's a role in dealing with some of those issues at the government level, and we need to engage there with a strong voice. Beyond that, we also have the ICANN venue. But we try to have too many of these conversations at ICANN. Too many of these conversations happen at the ICANN level for no reason, then that's where the registries and registrars are. And there's no convening body for the data centers, the SaaS providers, the PaaS providers, the IaaS providers, the ISPs and the broadband providers, the cloud infrastructure providers, the edge providers, the Internet of Things providers, and the DNS resolver providers. And when you're not engaging them in dealing with your problems, you're not effectively trying to solve the problems. We need to work diligently to move discussions that aren't specific to the naming and numbering function of the internet out of the ICANN environment. But we also need to be responsible members of the overall internet ecosystem. And we need to find the other venues to have these important conversations elsewhere. As the part of the industry with the most evolved policy machine in the internet ecosystem, we in the DNS industry need to find ways to better engage the rest of the internet ecosystem and make them part of the discussion. And we need to find the right venues to have those discussions. One such venue might be forums like this today. Another, maybe places like IGF. The fact that there's one centralized place, ICANN, where a few of the relevant parties gather doesn't mean it's the place to have these talks about the future of the internet from a policy perspective. ICANN isn't enough. Encryption, security, privacy, these are vital parts of what we offer. Holistic policy decisions about how these should be dealt with on the whole internet neither can nor should happen at ICANN. As we move forward into the future, we need to go into it with the understanding that the future is going to be more complicated than the past. And that it'll take all of us, including the vastly underrepresented rest of the internet ecosystem, to forge the right path forward. The internet's a network of networks that exists because the people that run them agree that it exists. It'll change more in the next 9 years than it did in the last 9. We increase our opportunity when we work together to make a safer, more secure internet, but we need to put a lot more effort into finding the right venues to do that in. Here are a couple of things that those in the DNS community can do to ensure that as we grow and fight for the future of innovation on a free and open internet, we're also continuing to make sure that we have a relevant part in that future. Let's go back to talking about AI. The way that AI is most likely to be effectively operationalize itself from a business perspective is to be heavily centralized. It's not too hard to imagine a near future where you get 90% of your information from Siri, from Alexa, from Cortana, who could connect via API to information that doesn't need to leverage the naming system, even if it does today. Tesla and Uber are connecting a worldwide network of transportation in similar ways. These are all examples of technologies that are changing the world, and none of them are bad things. They're exciting. But it's evident that AI can lead us down to connected technologies that can outpace the DNS community. These are guideposts for the DNS community. As the world continues to change, and that this industry's best path of changing with it is to support small businesses, to support the diversity of technological voices that comes from an environment where startups offer choice into the marketplace. Startups are changing the world. They should be doing so with technologies that the DNS community helps develop that meet the needs of tomorrow's world. If there are only 4 or 5 paths in the future that we all use to get our information, that's not healthy for the DNS. The internet thrives on being driven by small to medium-sized businesses, or SMBs. Supporting SMBs is supporting the DNS community. Fighting for the future of the internet and for this community needs to go through fighting for small businesses and fighting for environments in which people with ideas starting from nothing have a chance to compete. We need to stop thinking of ourselves as being in the internet industry. We're at the heart of the complete technological convergence. What we do is healthcare. What we do is defense. What we do is education. What we do is business. And what we do is social engagement. We are at the center of everything, and we need to stop thinking what we are doing is niche. We're not niche. And the decisions that come out of the policy discussions that we are having affect the entire world. I'm going to close my remarks today by making a plug for one more thing we all need to be working on: actively enabling the next billion to come online. There's half a world of people that are just starting to build their windmills. We need to find every opportunity to support them. We need to go to IGF and talk about how we can support capacity building efforts. We need to engage with ISOC and their development projects. We need to support the cause of universal acceptance, which is a core component of getting the next billion online, by letting them use the internet more effectively in their own language. I started by talking about the iPhone, or whatever mobile device you have. That's the way that people are connecting with our industry these days. It's 9 years old. The world is changing. We've spent the past couple of decades enabling the windmill builders to change the world. Apple's iPhone notwithstanding, that change has mostly come at the hands of small businesses. I implore the DNS community to keep innovating, keep listening to small business, keep fighting for solutions that scale down, keep fighting for venues to fix problems that bring in the whole internet ecosystem, which means keeping the conversations out of ICANN. And finally, keep actively working to bring the next generation and the entire world online. The parable again is, when the winds of change blow, some build shelters, some build windmills. If we want to keep a free and open internet, or if we simply want to be here in 9 years' time, you need to stay in the windmill business. Thanks. So, now is the open mic portion where, again, we're going to take a look at, you can talk about my reflections on the industry and what I've heard over the past couple of days. We can take a look at your observations of what you've discovered over the past 2 days and what you want to talk about. The floor is yours.
Christian, thank you. It's Jane Coffin from the Internet Society. I work with developing countries, emerging markets on internet infrastructure, different infrastructure than you discussed today. So internet exchange points, wireless community networking. And so I just wanted to thank you for the point you made about the development projects, because the next billion, or the last billion, if you will, are coming online and they're building infrastructure. And so in order to keep it safe, part of the discussions today, I kept thinking, oh boy, I know a lot of people that would appreciate, by the way, all of your expertise in this room. So the question is, how do we help facilitate that? Is it through toolkits? Is it through online seminars? Seriously, we do all of that, and we work very closely, of course, with many in the room. So the question is, how can we collaborate to make sure there's more data going out there and good expertise that exists, being the technical knowledge transfer? Thanks.
That's a great question. And isn't it interesting that I made that long list of different components of the internet's ecosystem and I missed a ton? Like, seriously, this is a huge environment in which we are only a small part, a very important part, but a small part. I am hoping that as this industry matures, it matures in ways that come to understand that its relevance is in its ability to grow, and that does mean supporting projects like yours. That's why I put that in there. I want all of us to agree to carry forward capacity building messages and to support the work of ISOC and any other environment in which we can try to bring the rest of the world online. David.
Thank you, Christian. That was just brilliant. That was wonderful. I'm David Viorst. I work with the IGF USA and ISOC DC, and we do try to provide those fora that you described, and I want to thank you for your help in actually all of the work that we do to do that. You talked about AI generating connections through API and other means that bypass DNS.
That could bypass DNS.
Yeah, that's pretty darn interesting. Could you flesh out how that relates to edge providers and cloud providers and what that might look like a little bit down the road?
Well, sure. A little bit, in that I am not myself a technologist. I work with technologists, I work with entrepreneurs, and I work with engineers. I'm far from being an engineer myself. But I do know that things don't need to connect via the naming system, that there are other ways in which the world connects. And in order to stay relevant, in order to stay at scale, I mean, here's one thing, in order to stay at scale includes, are people continuing to buy domain names like crazy because that's the predominant way that they're connecting? The question isn't necessarily, I don't see a world in which people stop using the DNS, but there could be an environment in which the domain name is depreciated in the world as far as the primary way to connect one another.
And what will those new windmills look like?
Well,
That's a really interesting.
what will those windmills look like? I think that that's a really good takeaway for this entire group. I'm not pretending to be a futurist. I know that there are incredible entrepreneurs out there that have things planned that I could never even imagine. And all I want to do is prepare people for that, to say, don't rest on your laurels and keep your ear to the ground, because I can't tell you what the future is going to be. But I know that it's going to be drastically different than what we have today.
Thank you, Klaus Stolz, Brokers Group. I think the depreciation of the domain names already happened. I mean, the domain name basically today has become a throwaway product for $1.99 somewhere, and that's wrong, and that's a problem. What we have, and I think this is that the major way to connect nowadays is not anymore the domain name system, it's social media. You just need one. So this is what you think is going to happen, is already happening. And also to come back to your comment about ICANN, I think what ICANN will happen with ICANN is quite simply that ICANN will go back to its roots, what it did best, to run the DNS, the technical side of it. And all the other stuff will slowly but steadily moving out. And this will happen the moment the transition is done. ICANN Corp will go back to its roots, and that's what's happening. We have to find ways how to discuss the other things, as you said, and find new fora and new ways to organize ourselves around the relevant topic. And I think the only way out, and I think that's one thing I learned from these last 2 days, is that the industry has to take over and the industry has to find solutions.
I don't completely buy the idea that we have lost the battle to the walled garden. I don't believe it. I mean, sure, there are lots of big websites that are popular that we spend a lot of our time on, and that's not a bad thing. That's increased adoption. It has created an environment in which people find value on the internet, and it draws them to it. But in my daily interactions with the internet, I connect in probably 100 different ways, only a few of which are in a walled garden environment. And again, when I talk about the need to support small business, it's because we want consumer choice. We don't want one way to connect. We want many different ways to connect. And I think that we're still in an environment in which that is possible. You know, we will see what the future brings. But I don't subscribe to the theory that the internet has gone from a free and open tool where people can communicate freely to one in which we have these segmented and regulated and closed down environments. These companies, and talk about the iPhone being 9 years old. These companies are not old. That you're talking about having walled gardens. The world is going to continue to change, and if we work diligently to make sure that it changes in ways that aid diversity of thought and opportunity and push entrepreneurship, there's no limit to where we can go with this. We're at the beginning of what's possible.
More thoughts, more questions?
Maybe, Paul, it's time for you to wrap us up.
That's happy to do so, Christian. Thank you very much. And as you offered, you presented a lot of thoughts, hard to wrap our heads around so quickly or in the moment. But Christian has offered to provide a text version of his thoughts. And we will post that along with the recordings of the last day and a half sessions that will be available at the ISOC DC site where we've been live streaming all this. So any things that were discussed over the last day and a half, colleagues that didn't have an opportunity or you want to refresh your memory, you want to use any of the content for your organizations, for your own educational, promotional, et cetera, efforts, it'll all be there. And we'll look forward to reading the thoughts as well as hearing them. With
Thank you,
that, I
Paul.
don't want to delay folks. On behalf of PIR, colleagues at Center, LAC TLD, I2 Coalition, and ISOC, we thank you for your time over the last 2 days. We hope you got a lot out of it, a lot of thought-provoking discussions, certainly a lot of opportunities for future exchanges, and at least my organization will continue to work with colleagues across the industry, and we'll look to bring some of those thoughts forward in future conferences, whether they're attached to ICANN or on our own and with other colleagues that weren't in the room over the last 2 days. So with that, we thank you for your time, and everybody go enjoy another great day in Washington.